Hello, I'm Larry Tatum, and welcome to my video on Kenpo self-defense techniques with the knives. In this tape, I'm going to take you on a little journey into the area of martial arts that most of you haven't been in yet. It's going to take some discipline, take a little bit of time. I want you to experience this, but I want you to remember this up front. Don't abuse this knowledge. And I'll look forward to seeing you back in a few moments. Get your gi on, or whatever you need to work out in, bring your knives, and make sure they're taped, you guys. And I'll see you right back here. Okay, now let's get started. But before we start learning techniques with these knives, I want you to understand a few principles that are extremely important when you are practicing. Number one is that we're going to learn to borrow force. That's particularly convenient for us if both sides of the blades are sharp. Number two, we have to watch out for what we call a backlash. It's that when somebody strikes out at you, they pull back suddenly, because if they miss on this shot, they may catch you on the backlash. Thirdly, we want to maximize our opponent's angles of entry, but at the same time, we want to minimize our own angles of entry. So these are some of the most important things that I'm going to start working on right from the beginning with the help of Cliff. Okay, now, I'm going to take borrowed force because it works very well in using the knives in that it minimizes you having to commit yourself so closely that you may get picked off with one of his blades. Now, I'm going to teach you in this tape to start fighting with two knives, not with one, but I'm going to start you with two, and I want Cliff to have two knives, because if I just start teaching you, put your left leg back, with one knife in one hand and the other one free, you're never going to be truly aware of what this other blade can do to you. All right? So we'll assume that we're both equal, okay? And that both sides of his knives are sharp as well. Now, what I'm going to do on this is I'm going to show you some different ranges of attacks to the arm, because we're going to start with this first. Now, I'm going to also get involved in what we call the four ranges or four zones of attack, of combat. But before we get there, I want you to understand that the area on the arm that we're going to deal with first is we're going to start with the fingers. We're going to go from the fingers. That includes all of the hand, the knuckles, the wrist, and up a little bit from the wrist, we're going to go into the high point of the muscle on the forearm. And then we're going to go up to the elbow, and we're going to understand that we're going to know how to cut and attack all the way around these areas I've just mentioned. All 360 degrees of the target is vulnerable to attack. So from the knuckles, the hand, the wrist, the forearm, the elbow, we're going to go up to the bicep, make a full circle there, pass the bicep down to the tricep. We're also going to go underneath the armpit, come up all the way over the shoulder, on the inside as well, and then we're going to go up to the trapezius muscle and then to the neck, and it's obviously we're going to cover 360 degrees as a target around the neck. Now, as we do this, I'm going to always mention these areas of attack on the arm, and as we go along, we're going to look at the leg as the arm. You could say that, well, this is the ankle, this is the knee, and this is the hip. So it's the same. What happens up here is also going to happen down there. So keep that in mind as we go along. Now, first thing I want to do is Cliff has a knife, and I'm going to teach you first how to use the blades tucked under your arm this way. Now, as this conforms to your own wrist, Cliff has decided to thrust or lunge at us with a strike to the throat. All right? We're going to use that as the base technique. Now, as he does that, I can meet that action and borrow that force, and the harder that Cliff pushes, the greater the cut is along the forearm, the wrist, and into the high point of the muscle. Now, when we're doing Kenpo, and in the martial arts, we hit nerve centers, and we hit targets that shock the system. When you're using the blade, you don't always actually have to hit the nerve centers to shock the system, because you're going to cut cartilage, you're going to cut tissue and blood vessels and nerves that attach the different nerve centers throughout the body. So it's almost like cutting the telephone wires and nothing else works. It's the same thing with the body. The knife will cut an area on the arm which will short-circuit the entire arm all the way up to the brain. The brain wants to send a message down to hold on to this, but it can't if you've cut those wires. Not only is the nerve getting cut when you're using a knife, But like I said, you're cutting muscles that can't constrict and allow you to even squeeze or hold on to a blade or even keep a hand clenched. So keep this in mind as we go through our techniques. So on this particular attack, Cliff has decided to lunge. Now, as I meet his action, okay, I want you guys, start in a right neutral bow, go ahead, and step off, adjust your line of entry just a little bit so you're in a zone of sanctuary. I don't want you ever straight in line to that blade, because if you miss or your timing is late, you may cut his arm, but you're going to sacrifice your throat for his arm. So to minimize that happening, you slip and you meet. And notice that I bring my other knife up as in check. Now, Cliff is going to react to this. If I have cut him hard enough or deep enough, he still may be able to react. Now, this part of my knife is still sharp. So what Cliff can do, out of the pain and out of natural instincts, he's going to do what? He's going to pull that arm back. And as he pulls it back, you're going to cut him again. All right, but it's not just good enough to pull your knife out and say, okay, he's cut here, and now he's cut here, because he still has a left hand. He still has feet. He still can use his head. He still has weapons. So what we're going to do, as he lunges, we're going to meet that action. As he pulls back, we're going to check with the opposite hand and get another cut this way. If the other blade comes up, then we can use the left hand in the same principle that we used our right hand. Lunge a little deeper and meet the action and cut on the same line. Okay? Now, there's a lot of what-ifs in a base technique. Our base technique was primarily this, striking and cutting back. Okay? How he reacts is how we're going to learn these techniques, because as I cut him here and he pulls back, I want you to go to a cat stance. The reason I want you to pull back as you cut him, if he lunges, at least you're out of range of that blade and you're just off angle. The dangers that exist right now is if I just blocked him and he backlashed with his left hand, he's going to cut my arm. Now, these are the problems that have to be dealt with. This is the reality of fighting with a knife. And this is how I tell people, you know, if you're going to learn this art, you don't want to use this. You walk away from a knife situation, and I'm going to keep telling you that throughout the tape. Now, we start again, off angle. As he pulls back, go to your cat stance. The cat stance will actually increase more leverage into the backlash of your own. If he decides to come through, like I said before, you can come up and meet this action. Now, if he starts to pull back, then meet him. Go with his action. Now, what I'm doing here is I'm executing a pinning check because I had both of his arms out. Now, he's going to want to pull free if he feels the pain or the natural instincts to pull free, so you go with that angle or path of least resistance. What he can do now to get out of this is he can step back. If I stay there, so go ahead, step back, Cliff. If he's not cut bad enough, he can reverse it and come back on me, and then I'm in the same situation he was. All right. So what I want you to do, when you practice this, by the way, make sure your knives, when you practice with your buddy, are taped, okay? And be careful. As he shifts that blade into me, and I pull back, and I meet his next blade, if I feel him start to pull, okay, then what I've got to do is go with it. If he steps back, step back with him again and keep him in check. At this point, I can take my left blade and keep him momentarily cross-checked, hook around his neck. With leverage here, now I can go to what we call a kill shot, cut the throat, and step back at the same time and cut him. Now, it looks good, looks like it makes sense. It does. The problem being, watch this bottom arm down here. If I pull, what's going to keep him from cutting my leg or cutting my waist? Go ahead, bring it up a little bit. Okay? So what I said is that you've got to minimize your angles of entry as well. So if I'm here, it's okay to pull and torque, but make sure that you step out of range and you are aware that that blade is still there. All right, now, thank you, Cliff. What I'm trying to do in this tape right now is get you to understand that you can't afford to slip. You're not fighting barehanded with another barehanded person where his hand just slipped by and happened to hit you on the thigh. because if you take a blade on the inside, there's a major artery that goes there, that if you open it up and you don't get to the hospital within about 10 minutes, you will die. You'll bleed to death. These are the realities of knife fighting. Okay, Cliff, come on back. Now, there's a lot of ways of borrowing force. Another way is that I'm going to turn Cliff to this side. Cliff, put your left leg back for me. Put your guard up. I can also use the blades open now. We're still borrowing force. Cliff has decided to lunge with the left hand. All right, now, I can meet it right at the fingers. I can also meet the blade to blade, providing that your knife has hilt. This takes a lot of practice, and the odds of you connecting blade to blade is pretty difficult at best. If you practice this long enough, you can get good at it, but there again, if you miss, all you've succeeded in doing is cut yourself. What I want you to do on this is I want you to step off again, just like in a technique we call reversing mace. And as Cliff comes through, we're going to parry right at the wrist. At this point, I want you to cut right on top, just behind the elbow. And you're going to follow this contour right here, because you want to sever this area right here. Because if you sever this, it'll also send a message here to drop that. But there's no guarantees that you cut deep enough, so you make sure that both blades do that. Now the hilt also, if he pushes down, gives me some protection. Without the hilt, you can slip in and cut me. All right, now watch again. As I move off, slip, I can let this slip through and right to the throat, and as I cut, I'm going to bring him on this side so you guys can see what I'm doing. As I come across the arm and I go under the throat, the top part of my knife is going to cut. And then I'm going to anchor down, and I'm going to cut on the way back. And you'll notice that the top part of the knife fits the hinge of the jaw. And what this allows me to do is cut going in and cut going back. This type of cut also causes, turn just a little bit for them, allows me to check rather, his depth zones, his height. This helps me control his width of the other hand. If he tries to turn into me, I've got some control up here. Now if you watch this, as he moves off, right up to the cut, you notice that I circle it, meet it under the throat, and cut back this way. At this point, I'm going to trap this left hand, and as I trap it to control the right side of his body, I want you to take your left leg, move up the circle, reach around, catch him again. Now as I cut again, you're going to apply pressure here, and you're going to step back with your right leg into a left neutral bow, but don't spin him towards you, spin him towards the ground as you cut again, and guide him down with the other hand. Okay, come on up, Cliff. Now, thank you, Cliff. What I'm trying to show you is what you can do, but I'm also showing you what can be done to you if somebody knows what they're doing with knives. Now, I don't care if it's a little pocket knife. If you have this type of knowledge, you can make it useful for you in a situation where it may mean your life. Okay, now, Cliff, let me borrow you again. Put your right leg back. Okay, switch. Okay, now what I'm going to do, since we borrowed force already with the blade tucked, and we borrowed force with it this way, okay, I want to actually borrow his force this way. We're going to hook it. All right, this is an open-end triangle, which is a very important concept and principle in the Kenpo system. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to learn to use my blade to hook. If Cliff lunges for me down low, then I'm going to step off. And notice that when I step, I hook. But I don't want to hook it right into me, so I use my left hand as a guide and a check. Now watch again. Now, as this checks, if I pull hard enough, it'll rip it right out of his hand. This way. Put it back up, Cliff. We'll just let it go as I pull. Ready? Boom. And we'll pull it right out of his hand. Let's do it again. It's a disarming technique. Your timing has to be right on the money as you grab it and hook it out. All right, but that doesn't do anything for the left hand. Okay? I'm going to grab the knife. Now, as I move off, I'm also moving further from the left blade. Okay? I'm moving up the circle and into, if you've already studied Kenpo, a zone of sanctuary. Now, as I move up and I trap and try to rip it out of his hand, I can also start to contour the arm now. And let's say that we'd managed to rip it out of his hand. We can then travel up the wrist, the back side of the tricep, and the back side of the forearm, and make another cut. But as I do this, what I want you guys to do is continually move up the circle, and as one cuts, another one checks. At this point, you can just run it right up to his throat. And if you look at it from this angle, that when I disarmed it, and I started to move up here, this checked right at the elbow, because I don't want to be below it, because the elbow can still move in. I don't want to be above it, because the hand can get free. But get right on this elbow. As I cut along the arm, I push with my knee, too, and then slip right up to his throat at this point. Again, it's no guarantee. I can take the back of the knife and cut him this way, as well as cut him with both blades. Okay, now, at this point, in this particular technique, there's no guarantee he's still going to be off his feet. So that's where you take the butt of the knife. If you need a knockout point, you can hit him with the butt of the knife. And imagine what that would do. The point I'm making now is just because you cut somebody in a knife fight does not mean that they're down yet. Even if you cut their throat, the carotid artery, or if you cut into the lungs. The point is, you may need a point where you have to reverse the knife and hit him with all that metal to knock him out. Okay, I want you to think about that. We'll be back in a few moments. Okay, let's keep on going. Okay, now, Cliff. Now, so far, we have gone to the outside of the right arm. We've gone to the outside of the left arm. Now, what I want to do now is go to the inside of the right. And the way we're going to do this is Cliff is going to lunge with a lower strike. He's going to lunge vertically to my stomach or the solar plexus. And what he does is I'm going to hook it again, but I'm going to step off and move up the circle. Now, one of two things, or both can happen. He can pull back, and hopefully, as he pulls back, he's going to go ahead, pull. I'm going to cut the fingers and pull the knife out of his hands, providing now that this is razor sharp. If he pulls back, at the same time he pulls, he can also pull and push. And that means I'm going to be dealing with what? Obviously, I'm going to be dealing with the other arm. So as you guys do this, you've got to be thoroughly aware of both blades. You've got to know where his knives are, and you've got to know where your knives are at all times. Now, as he steps off, I hook it. As the next blade comes in, I cut again on the high point of the muscle. If I hit it hard enough, and that's no more than an inward block, if I keep this tracked and I hit this hard enough, it's going to cross all the way to the other side of his body, which is going to act as a cross check. Now, at this point, my elbow acts as a check. I'm going to hook, grab both hands, put the wrists together, and I'm going to cut them across each other at this point. And as I cut them, this cuts 3/4 of the circle around the right forearm. This cuts the top half of the left wrist. And then this goes ahead and continues cutting. And I'm going to use a forward bow to cut the fingers and finish ripping both knives out of the hand at this point, if you can see it from this angle. All right, notice that after I'm done ripping, I also keep this hand in as a check. Now, with it checked there, let's take it from the beginning. Watch what happens. We hook, we cut, boom, we meet that action, we borrowed force there. Now we shuffle forward, use a forward bow, and cut both hands this time. Now what I want you to do, as you cut, I'm going to turn this angle just a little bit. We have 1, 2, move your arm over just a little more. Now watch the arms cross and see how they begin to cut each other at this point. Now as I trap this, let this cut travel on up around his rib cage and back to the throat. And now using this as leverage here, I'm going to cut and anchor. I'm not going to twirl him as much as I'm going to anchor him down and spin him. He will land on his back, but I'm going to use the counterbalance with both hands at this point. If you follow me down, I can use a closed kneel. Now, if I cut to the throat, if I drop low enough, I also have to keep one hand. If the other hand comes up, I cross-check him at this point and make a cut with the right hand. But you've got to be aware of these blades at all times. I want you to assume that you never did any damage at all at this point. Keep it in check, run it down, and as you cross out, keep both blades up. Jeff, come on up again. Now watch this again. We'll take it from this angle over here. By the position of his blades, it looks as though Cliff's going to lunge, but at the moment I hook, the other blade's going to start coming. I can adjust my technique and immediately go to a knockout punch right underneath the jaw. There's a nice little nerve under there that you can hit, and as I pull here, I can hit, check, and cut the wrist. See the angle of the wrist? And get a knockout point at this time. If he's still on his feet, all I need to do is just anchor my arm, and it helps control his height and getting back down. Now watch again. As I move, 1, 2, hit. And at any point in this thing, I can still go back up and make my cuts to both arms and the blade and back up to the throat again. But you notice as I move, I make sure that my knife cross-checks as I move around his body this way. I can't afford to have one too high. I'll get it in the groin or lower stomach. Can't afford to have one too low, because then he'll contour and track along my own arm. So it's a short, quick move en route to another target. But you've got to know where these knives are at all times. Thank you, Cliff. Good. Okay, now, let's take it a step further, and I want to get into the phase of Kenpo knife fighting, what we call fencing with the knives, just like somebody would with a sword or a foil, as you might call it. Cliff, put your right leg forward, if you will. Put your guard up. Now, we have, in Kenpo, we have out-of-range control, and that means that we really can't touch him, but yet we can affect him by moving, feinting, or doing something that's going to get him to react. If I move forward and he starts to move back from here, we have some type of effect on our opponent. Likewise, whatever I do, he can do in reverse to me. Now we get within range, the second zone of contact. In range, within range, that means that I can hit the blade, I can hit his knuckles, I can possibly hit part of his leg, this type of thing. As we go further along, we get into the penetration, which you guys know, they've studied Kenpo. That's the third zone. And the last one is contact manipulation. And that is where I've been working primarily between the third and the fourth zones since we started this tape. Now I want to go back up a little bit and go into the fencing area. Put your guard up, Cliff. And that is, if he knows what he's doing with a knife, then also you're going to have to fence with it, because you can't afford to suddenly just lunge in for a kill shot as if you were at a tournament and be oblivious to everything else. You can get away with that stuff even in the street to a point, barehanded. But even then we don't want to do that. We want to keep ourselves checked. So going in is extremely dangerous, because even though, let's say I got in on Cliff suddenly, as I go out, he could cut me on my way out. Okay? So what I want you to do is think of what we call, there's different types of what we call flailing, and what we were doing earlier is this was called flailing our targets or our opponents, but we also have what we call tenderizing. And tenderizing is no more than striking what we call the meat or the opponent's body, or striking the weapon itself. Now this particular type of knife, a Kenpo knife, weighs a good amount of weight, so there's a lot of mass behind it. Put your guard up. If you're confronted, it's just as easy to hit the blade, and it's extremely fast. It's a very fast move. You can go to the blade and then suddenly be into his throat. Now this action here will check his height momentarily. It'll put enough pressure down there to check it. And as you begin to move, and you're up to his throat, okay, now you're close enough that you can check this and make your cuts at this point. If you don't want to go to the knife, and Cliff doesn't have his knuckles wrapped today, so I'll be very careful, then you can break the hand with this type of weight in this blade. You can strike here and then gradually work your way up to the targets, okay? Cutting as we did before and moving in. At any point that if you strike down with one and he brings the other blade up, you can also parry with on the reverse of that motion. If the bottom hand comes up again, you can come down and cut it this way. And now watch again. We've decided to parry one. I see the other blade come, and the next blade. Whoop. All right, now, if I slap that blade down, he can also reverse it on me. Okay, I can send this into orbit. In Kenpo, we know that if we hit something at the wrong angle, it can come flying back at us. If I do this, there's a chance that it also can bring it back into my face. So when you do this, it's not so much a push like this as it is a short snap this way. Okay, now watch it from this angle. And then make your cuts. Now you're in a position to cut. And notice I'm using my knee as leverage and this arm as leverage. If I see that other hand start to come around, I can check it with this, cut down the side of the neck, and cut again on the wrist as I begin my move. And you notice how I got in there was I picked my way in. He put his guard up with his knives and down and back up. And this is what we're doing. Okay? Thank you, Cliff. Okay, let's keep on going. All right, with the help of Cliff. Now, I'm going to teach you another principle about knife fighting, and I want you to remember this one. This one's very important because not only can you do it to somebody else, but this could very easily happen to you. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with a jab, okay, above my shoulders. He maybe go into my face or throat or the side of my neck. But as he does it, I'm going to parry with both hands. I'm going to have one parry and try to cut the forearm here. I want the other one to be blade to blade at this point, okay? Now, as he lunges this way, I'm going to hit. Now, as Cliff starts to spin to pull out of this, I'm going to meet that action, and the more that he turns his body, the worse it gets for him at this point. And you watch my blade as it traveled from the time he started spinning, it contoured this muscle group right here. And as he turned, it started to cut, and the more he pushed his body towards me, all I had to do was stay on his body. So he's actually, in a sense, cutting himself. It's not that I'm trying to suddenly, from this action, go from here and then try to find a target and cut it over here, and bypassing these tendons and this muscle group, as well as the tendons that connect the arms as well. But what's happening, as he moves, I just ride the body. Now, at this point, if I want to keep going, I can go underneath the armpit and cut another area that will make him let go of this. Now, as he keeps spinning, he only, again, keeps forcing this new blade, the right hand of mine, to cut into the armpit and the top part of the rib cage. Keep spinning. Again, now I'm going to ride and keep him checked. I can move back up the circle this way and come underneath and make a cut over or under. At this point, if we're just going to take this, we're going to evolve this technique. With my hand here cutting and also checking the bottom arm, if that one came up, I could meet it, and as he keeps pushing, I can redirect it and now cut it on this side. And if you look at it from this angle, you would see that this bottom hand would also be cut along with the top hand as I cut the ribs. Now watch this again. All I'm doing is making a circle all the way around Cliff, and I'm allowing him to help the knives cut for me. Now watch again. We're from here, we hit it, he starts to move, so I track along. I could track along this side. He starts spinning and keep cutting, step out. If he cuts again or tries to cut with the other hand, keep it going, trap him. And now if I need to, I can also take out the leg to stop him from turning as I make my cut at this point and keep him cross-checked all the way down here. Thank you, Cliff. Okay, now what I want to do is I want to take some of the material that we have already learned and worked on, and I want to move it up now a little bit, and we're going to get back to the parries, and we're going to get to a point to where now, if you saw the Form 8, the previous video, you notice that there were parts in there when I flipped the knives back and forth in my arms, my hands. So what I want you to do is be able to have that dexterity with your weapons. Now, with the help of Cliff, we're going to take a situation where Cliff lunges first with the right. We're going to parry, and then we're going to allow the other blade to come in up high. We're going to parry again, and he's going to come back again for a second time. At that point, I want you to go to a right 45-degree cat stance. So the first move, we're neutral. As he lunges in, you notice that I torque from the wrist to get the parry, to make it quick. It's not an arm movement, but watch again, it's just from here. Now, as the other one comes in, I do the same thing, and as he comes again, it's easier for me to just move my wrist backwards in reverse of the same action and hit it here. Now, if we do this, and Cliff finds good, that he wants to back out of this and start using his natural weapons, then I can meet those natural weapons with a hook, with a cut, and then another cut. And you notice that on this cut, what I did was not only did I cut here at the ankle and across the high point of the calf muscle, but I cut the artery back behind the knee, and then again I cut and brought my blade around as I went into a twist stance to bring him this way. Now I'm going to finish that move off, use my natural weapons, and I want you to strike with the butt of it. Make sure you keep checked. I'm going to leave my hand here so you can see what I'm doing, to the base of the neck here. You can hit with it. At this point, let it slip. Catch the throat. Use this as a brace as you cut him. And as you cut, you bring the knife all the way around and cross out. So you reinforce the same line that you were cutting on. Okay, now let's watch this again. First move. Go. 1, 2, 3. He backs up. I see a leg coming in. I match it. I rip both sides of it. Use my natural weapon. Make my strike. Come around. Cut the throat and come back around this way again. Making one final cut. Thank you, Cliff. Okay, now let's do another technique. In this one now, I'm going to go back and borrow force again, and I'm going to contour and allow him to help cut again as we did before. Cliff, come on up. Now what Cliff is doing now is his right leg is forward and my left leg is forward. And as he lunges along this line, this is the line of attack, straight towards my stomach, what I'm going to do is I'm going to borrow it and pull him so that I bring him up onto that right foot. Okay? So we're going to borrow, shoot, his motion here, and then cut. Come back off of that, check with this hand, and use my forearm to brace me into cutting the ribs open at this point. Okay, now watch again. He lunges, pull, cut. Bring this up to the throat. Turn it over so it's vertical, using this as a fulcrum point. Anchor down, and now, at this point as I anchor down, I'm going to watch my bottom blade. It travels up the body, still cutting, as I step through and anchor down and cut the throat at this angle. Now I want you to watch it from over here. Back up just a little bit, Cliff. Okay. As he lunges, I hook, cut, bring this underneath, and anchor. I get my cut and I slip this up, and I'm up in a cat stance now, and I just drop my weight at this point. Now, keeping myself in check, I can finish the moves by just turning and torquing him down on his stomach. But notice that my right hand is still guiding him, what we call angular guidance. It's keeping him checked, his height checked, even though he's cut. At this point, if he still wanted to come back up, then again I'd use the butt of the knife to hit the skull or hit behind the neck to finally put it out. Like I said before, cuts don't guarantee that your opponent's out. Thank you, Cliff. Good. Okay, now I want to go back and start using a little more of our natural weapons again. Just because you're using a man-made weapon doesn't mean you should eliminate your natural weapons, not at all. It's just that you've got to be very careful when you employ a natural weapon, because if you put it in range of his knives, there's a good chance you might get a cut as well. Cliff, everybody good. Now, we have a technique called shield and mace. Okay? Now, it's part of the Kenpo system, and we're going to use part of that. Then I'm drawing this particular technique out of the forearm, at least a piece of it. And what I'm going to do on here when Cliff lunges for my face or my throat is that I'm going to cut this way as if I'm doing an outward block. Okay? So now, as he moves here, I cut, all right, and I thrust at this point. All right, now in using these knives, you can stab, you can torque, and then you can ream. Okay? On a thrust. Already we've sliced, we've tenderized, we've filleted, okay? But at this point now, I want you to think of stabbing, okay, either horizontally or vertically, and then torquing, and then reaming. All right? Now, in combat, and before particularly before guns were invented, when people used knives and swords and spears in combat. If they thrusted too deeply with the blade, there was a good chance it was difficult to get it out of the opponent's body. In fact, if you were on the battlefield and you were fighting one guy and you couldn't get your weapon out, because what happens is when a blade goes inside the body, the blood and the muscles and everything suddenly forms a suction around it. And they had to use their hand or their foot to push and pull to get the blade back out. And you couldn't afford to have your blade going too long because somebody else would be attacking you at the same time. And this is something that I doubt if any of you ever run into. It's highly impossible, more likely that it wouldn't happen. But you should know what the knives can do, or what can a man-made weapon with a blade can do once it enters the body. Now, in many cases, they had reamed to cut more, not more tissue, but to cut more blood vessels and so forth, to cause more damage. But on the way out, they would torque to get it out or use their foot to push and pull. In this case, what we're doing here, as he strikes, we're cutting up to meet that action, and we're thrusting, and then we're reaming this all the way in. Now, at this point, as I use marriage of gravity and I drop my weight here, he's going to get a reaction out of this. Now, I've probably, if at this point, has broken a rib or pierced a rib and have entered the lung cavity. Okay, so his breathing is going to be restricted at this point. But I still will probably get a reaction here, and the arm will come back. Well, I'm going to allow it to come back up to his throat. As that happens, I torque this out, make a small circle, press against his wrist, and at this point, if Cliff turns around for me, at this point in the fight, my knife will cut his Adam's apple, this will cut his wrist, and this acts as leverage to not only cut the throat here, but then to cut down the inside, right down the bicep and inside of the elbow at this point. Okay, now watch again. We meet the action, we get out of line of attack, and we ream this in. Okay, and also a reaming shot like this causes a depth check as well as a width check and a height, because see, the body starts to crumple as well. So I ream it in. Now I get a reaction, I follow it, and I keep it up there. Now this will put enough torque in there to cut the throat, and if I need to, I can now start to employ a natural weapon as I pull out to increase the leverage of the strike going out. And notice that I kicked the knee. All right. Also, I didn't want this to come back into play, so I took out the foundation as well. Now watch this again. Good strike, ream it, it follows up, make my cut and my kick all at the same time. As I cross out, cross behind him, keep your guard up, put your knives in a position that you're most comfortable with too. And I want you to practice that as you do these techniques. Thank you, Cliff. Good. Okay, now we've gotten pretty carried away in our technique so far, and it shows the simplest things could be very complex. But I want to go back to simplicity right now with the help of Cliff. Come on over here, Cliff. Just put your right leg forward. You know, in the Form 8, it starts with basically with a few circular movements, and it goes into the finger set. And the finger set is kind of like the beginning of the book. It tells you, it shows you every angle that the knives can be used on within a fight. And so if we go back to the finger set, we can extract some information out of there. There's a lot of knowledge in there that allows me to create techniques and will allow you to create your own techniques. Now, for instance, and I talked earlier about going blade to blade. Now, there's a reason for that. If these were clubs and Cliff lunged for my face and I parried, and that you know that you'll see guys use clubs, and the other hand comes in, and they hit this way. And there's nothing wrong with it. In fact, it's very good. Except the problem is if I get a backlash out of him, these are knives. These aren't clubs. And here's the danger. If the first one comes in and I parry, and the second one comes in, and I go to cross his arms, and he backlashes, I'm going to end up cutting myself. And his knives are going to cut me as well. So what you can do with a club doesn't necessarily mean that you can employ the same principles, okay, with the knives because of that backlash. All right, now, if we do get blade to blade, and like I said earlier, it's difficult at best, but if you practice, you can fence with these and actually get blade to blade as you progress through the art of the knives. If he lunges, and we'll take the finger set, and he lunges for me, if I manage to catch the hilt under here, and notice I keep one hand up there as a guard, because if I'm going to try and go blade to blade, I want a double factor involved here so I can protect myself. Now, if I take the first move in the finger set, and because we both have hilts, and I start to run this move towards his throat, not only do I get a check, but if you look over here, we'll really go just a little bit, but I get a cut on that carotid artery right here. Now watch this again. As he lunges, I catch it blade to blade. Don't get your fingers up there. Keep your hands back. He's probably going to pull back anyway, and as he pulls, torque it, and you get a cut and a check at the same time. Now, I'm purposely avoiding this, talking about the left hand right now, because I'm concerned with teaching you just this basic move right here. Okay, watch it again. I pick it up. Notice his hand checks, and then I'm going to find out where he's going with this blade. If he starts to arc it in some direction, I'm going to follow him. If he tries to arc it the other way, I'll follow him, and not only will I follow him, but I'll torque it in the opposite direction. If he goes to my right, and I just torque my hand, I can torque this right out of his hand and also check it right up against him. Now, he's got the blade up against his skin. He's wide open for a strike from my left hand as well. What I'm teaching you here now is blade allows you really to follow where he's going. You can do an exercise where you put your knives together and let him start pushing in different directions. Go ahead, Cliff. You can torque it here if he tries to get out that way. Follow him. If you get up to the point to where it gets too high and he starts to cut back down, stay blade to blade with me. Okay? Follow him around. Push towards me. I can push towards me this way. I can torque it and redirect that motion. And you notice here, if I torque it, I can pull it out of his hand this way, because his hand becomes a fulcrum, because I get caught in here with the hilt, and I can torque it out of his hand. Let's go back up again. Now, we met this way. I'm going to start following him. Go ahead. I can switch my stance as I follow. Okay. If he pushes forward to me, doesn't mean I have to go anywhere else. I can also push and redirect it. If the other hand comes into play and he lunges for my face, you can go blade to blade. As you go blade to blade, you take the bottom hand and torque it and run this into him. Now, leaving the top hand as a cross check. This looks like the universal pattern. Is that an accident? No. Okay, that's the way these knives are designed to be used. By holding that in place, and if you turn a little bit so they can see in the camera, if I suddenly rip down, I'll cut the fingers at this point, and while I'm keeping him checked, I can then turn my blade over and use a principle of using one against the other and torquing it and opening up the body cavity this way. Okay? Now that little technique is in the form. It was a method of striking, and instead of trying to push down for a cut, use your body weight and the hammering power of the knife to do it. Now this all started from a simple move of going blade to blade. Okay? And like I said, he can start maneuvering that knife and following him and get used to feeling that, whether it's this way or whether it's this way. Start moving it towards me. And know and figure out where that blade is. Okay, and then, as you guys practice on, you can go blade to blade, and I'm sure most of you guys that are training at this level know what sticky hands are. Is when both arms and hands stay together as you practice. If he lunges with the left or with the right, if he tries to pull out of it, go ahead, Cliff. You just start following him and keeping a hold of either the blade to blade, or you may have to go into the wrist to make a cut. But in any case, it's an art. You have to practice it. You've got to understand. You've got to feel the angles of least resistance. You've got to experience it by practicing and understand where he's going with it. Now, if we go back to the finger set, when I went blade to blade this way, and I did the first move, it gave me a cut and a check. The second move in finger set is just a vertical move. Well, that allows me to cut straight up underneath, and I keep turning Cliff around so you guys can see, but right up underneath, instead of a cut this way, now the cut goes up underneath the jawline. If I pick Cliff up, and I manage to pick it up this way, and I just don't turn it all, but I torque it, then I get a cut on the top part of the knife. If he started to pull back low, then I would follow it into the ribs as well and use that as a cut. Once you get to a corner like that, you can check, turn, and cut. You're not bound to stay in that position at all. So what I'd like you to do, thank you, Cliff, very much, is to take your knives, go back to the previous tape, and take a look at some of the things that are going on in that form, and see if you can't put it to use and design your own techniques. All right, that concludes our self-defense tape on Kenpo knives. Now, what I want you guys to think about is that this is not a game, it's not a toy, it's a very dangerous weapon, and although you can be very good and very adept with these, they can also be turned against you. And you know, some people asked me, they said, Mr. Tatum, they said, you're really going to put out a tape that actually shows how to use the knives? And I said, well, I'm a little concerned. I thought about it for a while. And they said, well, won't people misuse this knowledge? And I said, well, you know something, as my teacher told me, a punk will not develop himself as a weapon. He won't discipline himself or take the time. He'll go out and buy a weapon. Now, if I have to worry about you other martial artists going out and misusing this knowledge, I wouldn't have done the tapes. But that is not what I'm concerned with. I'm concerned with that people will think that they're more confident with this than they really are. You see, the more that you learn about a weapon like this, the more that you will walk away from trouble. And that's the purpose of learning these knives, because the odds of anybody actually having to use this are very rare. The more you know, the more you want to stay away from it. So I have every trust in most people that purchase these tapes will take the time to discipline themselves and really analyze what this art is all about. Well, I look forward to seeing you in my other videos, and I hope you enjoyed this one.